Hey, I forgot to record an intro for this video. These are my thoughts on the current most popular Deltarune theories and some of my own observations that I came to on my own, even if they do align with other theories. In the background you'll see some of my test runs of the post-patch Rudy Knight to see how much easier they are. Very, if you're wondering. If you're ever confused about what theory we're on, I will put the name of it on the top of the screen, and I'll probably also have chapters in the video if I'm not too lazy. And of course, as must always be prefaced, I have considered literally every angle possible. I have missed absolutely zero pieces of evidence. There is absolutely nothing you can say to change my opinion ever. In fact, if you disagree with me, you're wrong, and there is actually only one valid interpretation of Deltarune, and that is my own. With all that out of the way, please enjoy the video. So, Kris Slash. I don't really want to believe it's true, but the slash coming from behind and the knight disappearing is so weird. Broad strokes, I'd give it a 50% chance, and for it to be true, I think the game would have to make a better explanation for why Ralsei stays silent. Although, the fact that Kris coughs to the knight if you get hitless is pretty suspect. It's often interpreted as a message to the knight to wrap it up, and I'm really unsure what else it could be if not that. But then, why would Kris need to signal to the knight if they were going to bail them out anyway? The slash would also represent a severe denial of the player's will with the Hearthstone side. Far greater than anything before or after. I guess the organ playing in Chapter 4 would represent something similar, but then that would beg the question of exactly how much power Kris has while possessed, which is a gargantuan can of worms in itself. I have no way of answering that. I've also heard that Kris being knighted is a clear sign that Kris did the slash, and I do admit it would make sense, but I think it makes an roughly equal amount of sense that Kris got knighted simply for showing their strength. You know, their leadership strength. I know Susie chips the knight's sword. And then, Neo-Woody theory. I really don't have a lot to say on the subject. It doesn't really matter to me, one way or the other. There probably will be an allusion to cowboys in Chapter 5, just because of how much of the community wants it. I'm not so sure about a secret boss, but yeah. And then there's Kris will lose a hand. Sure, why not? There's plenty of foreshadowing. The story seems to be leading Kris and the Fun Gang into a direction of greater and greater danger. It makes plenty of sense. I'm just not sure what narrative significance it would hold beyond Kris not being able to play piano as well. And then there's the knight theories, who is the knight? I guess right now I'll start with Carol Knight. Honestly, hardest no possible without it being an absolute guarantee. Carol is almost certainly the voice on the phone, but her being the knight would raise a lot of questions. Chiefly, how does she get to the church fountain before the Fun Gang if we see her still in the house by the time we leave? She would need a fountain if she could teleport like Ralsei, and I don't know where there would be a fountain in her house. We explore basically every room. There really can't be a secret tunnel. There's just no indication for it. No foreshadowing, and I think it would be kinda dumb. And then there's also the argument that the knight's sword is a katana. I feel like I'm going crazy. It is not a katana, definitely not. Crucially, the main part of the blade is wider than its handle, which I don't think any kind of sword does. I know there's swords where parts of the end of the blade are wider than the middle part, but I've never heard of a sword that is wider than the handle. And crucially, it's also missing a crossguard, even the circular crossguard that katanas are known for. But You know what does have an end thicker than its handle and doesn't have a cross guard? A baseball bat. It could also be a wiffle bat, but it doesn't necessarily need to be one, even though Des has a stronger connection to wiffle bats, as described in Noelle's dialogue. She also has a connection to baseball through Noelle, because Noelle has a baseball moon in her room, and Queen throws baseballs. Noelle just has a connection to baseball. It's also just easy to infer based on Des being sporty. I base that on, the broken wiffle bat in her room, the roller blades and roller skates. Yeah. And then there's Rudy Knight, which I think is maybe slightly more plausible than Carol Knight. Rudy doesn't really have a whole lot to do because he's in the hospital all day. Really, the issue with any regular Lightner being the Knight is that they have to have alibis and a secret dual nature. Rudy would have to sneak out of the hospital, of which there is only one exit, which is the front door, which is being watched, and then walk all the way back to the church while still being worn out from his previous activity. And the same thing for the end of chapter 3. Rudy would have to sneak out, walk to Kris's house, overpower the younger, healthier, more fit Undyne for long enough to rush her to the bunker, and then walk all the way back to the hospital to do the church thing tomorrow. Maybe he's faking his illness, but there's really no evidence for that. The nurse, who presumably earned a degree in nursing somewhere, could probably tell that Rudy's faking his coughing and lethargy as soon as they examined him. At the very least, it would become obvious over the minimum 3 days that the game has taken place over. Asgore could have helped Rudy carry Undyne to the shelter, but Rudy would still have to run and hide somewhere, to not be caught. But I do like this theory because it is funny to imagine Rudy just like aura farming on these kids. But that's about it. And then there's everyone's favorite Des Knight. Really, there's multiple versions of it, and my belief in it depends on the version, of course. Do I think Des, as she was when she went missing, is the Knight in the Dark World, and her Dark World form is just like that for some reason, and she can overpower Undyne in the Light World for some reason, and she wants to end the world for some reason, and she's perfectly fine aura farming while hurting Kris and their friends for some reason? Definitely not. I think it's more possible that Des became corrupted somehow, probably something to do with the voice in the code. I don't buy that Des would need to be in 2 places at once. It could very easily just be from the past. I've heard the argument that the voice cannot be from the past because it is reacting to events in the present, i.e. the scratching, which some people believe to be us digging through the code. To that, I would say in the files, past, present, and future events can be viewed simultaneously. It's more likely we are viewing the unused dialogue in its present as it's happening, as we do when we view other dialogue through the files. But really, we know so little that the answer could be anything. But for my money, the Knight definitely is Des in some capacity. And then next is the original Fun Gang theory. I have mixed feelings on this theory, which I'm gonna lay out now. The theory is predicated on a single inference, from which several other inferences could be made, and several more from that. The inference is that Des wrote Raise Up Your Bat, and Blood Crushers is her band. Crucially, we have no guarantee that this is actually true. There's some evidence that it is true, or I think it would add a lot to the story if it is true, but we really don't know for sure. But if we assume that Des did write the song, then the allusions to the dark would imply Des has some level of experience with the Dark Worlds, or even went on adventures in the Dark World. To add to that, the lyric "Your heart as my mark" or "Your heart as the arc" would lead us to believe that Des knows about Kris's soul, which would imply that Kris was there to some extent in Des's adventures into the Dark World. But then, if Kris was there, since Azriel and Des were so close, we could probably also assume that Azriel was there with them too. And since Shaum knows so much about the Dark Worlds, far more than most other Darkners, and Shaum was owned by Azriel at one point at least, then we can assume that Shaum also joined them in the Dark World. And then we see that book that Azriel borrowed from the library called How to Draw Dragons, and then we see the badly drawn dragon in Des's room, and we know that there's a dragon in Lord of the Hammer, which is based on the prophecy. And then we start, thinking, were they trying to follow the prophecy? You can see where I'm going with this, right? It's a big cascade. But after that, the theory gets mostly into how Des became the knight in some way. The shadow crystals are parts of her soul. Really, once we get there, I just go, yeah, sure, that could happen, because we really don't know much, as I've said before. But you can probably see where my mixed feelings are coming from just a single, well-substantiated inference. We kind of reach this snowball of claims that get less and less substantiated as time goes on. We start from here, and then we end up all the way over there. Really, I think if Des did write the song, then the only thing that's truly guaranteed is that Des has had experiences with the Dark Worlds, and that she knows about Kris's soul to some extent. But I don't want to knock the theory too much, because it would be very compelling if it's true, at least to me. And as a side note, there is one thing that I think could substantiate this theory just a little bit, even though it's kind of conjecture. The box of odds and ends in Des's room could very well be analogous to Kris's ball of junk that we see in the light world. Just think on that. And then from here we have my own observations about the story. These could tie into other well-established theories, but the thoughts are mostly my own. And the first one is, what the heck was that move that the knight was going to do to Toriel at the end of chapter 3? We assume that the knight was going to kidnap Toriel, but if the knight really wanted to kidnap Toriel, they would have just gone into that weird bird form and just, ran right for the door as soon as the chance was open. Whatever they were trying to do was not kidnapping. If you ask me what they were trying to do, I genuinely don't have much of an idea. It looked like some kind of sucking power. Maybe it was trying to suck out her soul. One thing I did notice is that it's kind of similar to the final attack that the Titan uses before Gerson, smashes its face in. If we go off of that, we could assume that the knight was going to use a big laser on her and kill her right then and there. Of course, that would beg the question of what the goal would be, but if that was the goal, to kill Toriel right then and there, I think it's possible that Kris subverted the plan by slashing the tires and keeping that door open to get Undyne into the Dark World. And then from there, we could just assume that the knight kidnapping Undyne was a sort of emergency plan B, so that, they wouldn't leave completely empty-handed. But then if we assume that, then that begs the question, if Carol, Kris, and the knight are all working together, then Carol should have known that Kris wouldn't go for a plan like, let the knight kill Toriel, unless we assume that they're more trying to, corral the knight or something. I don't know. It gets very complicated once we go down this line of thought. And next up is, do monsters bleed? Honestly, zero clue whatsoever. The Rabbit Kid dialogue and the scene at the end of chapter 4 seem directly contradictory to each other in a way that seems, I don't know, kind of reckless, uncharacteristic of Toby Fox. It could simply be that monsters need the necessary faculties to bleed, and those without just don't. Like that one green fire monster in the diner. Maybe the Rabbit Kid is one of those? Although that does lead me to ask, if most monsters bleed, does that mean their blood also turns to dust when they die? The books don't explicitly say monsters turn to dust when they die, only that their dust is buried. So maybe they're cremated. But then Susie treats Gerson's dusty hammer in the light world more like a corpse than an urn. Yeah. Truthfully speaking, I have no explanation. Let's hope for more clarification in Chapter 5. And now we're into the last part of the video. Buckle up because I have a lot to say. What was the last prophecy? It's one of the biggest mysteries of the game. I don't think we'll be able to glean the answer so easily so soon, but I think we can get some pretty good guesses from looking at Susie's reaction. Before we take a look at the reaction itself, it's important to realize that before that point, Susie was all in on the prophecy, to the point of wanting to read more to know what to do next. If it were me, I would probably consider what following the prophecy would mean for my free will, but Susie just charges forward. Of course, she charges forward until she sees the end of the prophecy, at which point, by the end of chapter 4, she is all in on subverting it, likely also taking to heart what Gerson said in his secret boss fight. I also heard a really good reading of the scene in a YouTube comment. I wish I could find it, but it's probably lost now, but I will paraphrase it to the best of my ability. If the last prophecy was so unbelievable as to be laughable, as Susie would like us to believe, she would have just let it stay and let Kris get a look so they could both have a good laugh from it. If the last prophecy made her angry, she would have just used her axe to smash it. Instead, she does neither and smashes it with her fist. So it's likely that whatever was in the last prophecy was so shocking that it triggered an immediate gut reaction to smash it as fast as possible and go into extreme denial about what she just saw. So then, what did she see? It needs to be something that she would immediately understand. So no complicated gaster magic or anything like that. It also needs to be something that would get an immediate emotional reaction out of her, like something pertaining to her friends, or at least to the dark fountain in the closet. To that effect, one of the theories is that the last prophecy says that Castletown must be sealed, and I can definitely see it. The Dark Worlds represent a large part of what makes Susie happy. It's where most of her friends come from, aside from Kris and, I guess, Noelle by chapter 4. It's also where a majority of her character growth occurs, especially in chapter 4, so to be without them would probably be devastating for someone like Susie, who doesn't have much outside the Dark Worlds, as evidenced by the state of her room. However, the fact that Susie says that obviously Ralsei wouldn't let it happen makes me think sealing Castletown is not what it says. Up to this point, Ralsei has repeatedly confronted Susie with the idea that Darkners are not real people and shouldn't be cared about in the same way a real person would, a maximum of 3 times by my count. Once at the beginning of chapter 3, once at the end when talking to Tenna, and another time when entering Ralsei's room. Each time, it's the same general message. Darkners are not real people and shouldn't consider themselves anything more than objects and shouldn't even really have any desires. Susie would need to be really, really oblivious to think that Ralsei obviously wouldn't let Castletown be sealed. Susie is oblivious about things like the relationship between Kris and the Knight, but as far as things actually told to her, that has not been shown before in the game. So then, what would the fun gang not let happen, especially Ralsei? For my money, say it with me, it would be letting someone die. Kris and Susie obviously have their own morality to consider if someone were to get hurt or die in a dark world, which is why they try to protect Gerson when they think he's a Lightner. And Ralsei holds Lightners in higher regard than Darkners, to the point of believing Darkners are only there to serve Lightners, so obviously Ralsei would find it unacceptable for any Lightner to be harmed, especially at the hands of a Darkner in a dark world. It probably wouldn't even need to be that reasoning for Susie. She would probably just see Ralsei as the kind of pushover who doesn't want anyone to get hurt, especially after his speech in the hallway of friendship. So then, who has to die? Well, I have a couple guesses. If you subscribe to the idea that the Weird Route is fulfilling the prophecy, then the Christ parallels in the Thorn Ring that you give to Noelle would make her a very good candidate. Although, Susie doesn't consider Noelle to be part of the prophecy, at least as far as I'm aware. So upon reading that, she probably thinks that she has to die. Or this whole line of thought could be wrong, and it actually says that Kris has to die. That would work too. I've heard the criticism that a character dying wouldn't fit the tone of the story, but I disagree. Death and its consequences play a very strong role in the story so far. For one, you can see the graveyard as early as chapter 1, so death is very much an acknowledged force in this world. Beyond that, you can find the Snowdrake family grieving for a lost loved one, and Alvin's whole character arc is learning how to fill the shoes of his father after his passing. To add to that, a large portion of Noelle's struggles and motivation to stay in the dark world at the end of chapter 2 lie with her father, who has been very sick for up to 4 chapters now, and his condition has not improved. Rudy himself even alludes to how Noelle's home life would change if he were to pass. So yeah, death is important to Deltarune's story. And that's all my thoughts on the Deltarune theories so far. I know there's probably a couple I missed. I might tackle them in another video, but that's all I have for now. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I hope you have a good day going forward. Get dunked, Roaring Knight. I'll see you probably another time. Bonus theory? Did Sans and Toriel pork at the end of chapter 4? I mean, from a surface level, you could probably think that. She's drunk, she brought a guy home, and they're dancing, but the Badumtus sound effects should make it pretty clear that they're telling jokes and not, you know, is what I would say if I was a child. If Sans and Toriel didn't do the deed, then why is there a 5-second delay between Toriel talking and the Badumtus? Oh yeah, you know what that means. Kris is getting baby bones as a sibling.